So it's sort of a tricky one. All the things that perhaps we would normally consider to be well-being, like physical health, mental health, material well-being, material health, uh, those on the surface, like, oh yeah, that's well-being. But in fact, if we look a little more closely, that would be a very narrow definition of well-being. It would be delightful to have all those things, but if we need that to feel well-being, then we're in a little bit of a difficult situation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Cator Sachoy. Cator began the practices of yoga, Buddhist meditation, and energy healing in 1990 to support recovery from chronic illness. Through the regular practice of these disciplines, she regained her strength and vitality. Cator is a craniosacral practitioner, yoga therapist, and meditation guide. She has an inclusive family-based private practice in San Francisco Bay Area. Cator teaches classes, workshops, and retreats locally, online, and internationally. She is the author of the TMJ Handbook, a therapeutic guide to relieving jaw tension and pain with yoga and mindfulness. Hi, Cator.
Hi there. Nice to see you.
You too. How are you doing today so
Good.
far?
It's turning out to be a warm, sunny day. It was cool in the morning, but it's warming up now.
I love it. Yeah, we're grateful for that in the Bay Area, huh? Especially you're there in San Francisco, right? And so it's
I'm in Berkeley now, just moved
oh,
over to this
okay.
side of the bay.
Oh, okay, so a little warmer.
Yeah.
A little warmer. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I love talking with folks who have background in yoga, meditation, Buddhism, and craniosacral therapy. Actually, craniosacral therapy had a significant impact on my thinking.
Hmm.
Somewhat. Oh man, I'm showing my age now. Some 20 years ago,
Hmm.
when I first got introduced to it, and it has been influential in my perspective on well-being and health. Got me back into yoga, and which led me into meditation and all this other stuff. So looking forward to this. I know I just read that bio, but I would love to have you share a little bit about yourself today.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be here. Um, I'm just looking forward to talking with you. I know your idea of well-being is fundamental to what you're doing. And so I would have to say that my whole personal quest, my healing journey was fundamentally around well-being. That I finished college in my, early 20s and had some chronic illness. And I had always been an athlete. So it was unusual for me and really messed with my identity because I believed myself to be a physically able person. I was very identified with my able-bodiedness. And I couldn't do what I had done. It just really was like a steam engine, like running out of steam, my last year of college and right afterward. And so for a while, I was just like beating my head against the wall of conventional medicine because I wasn't able to get help there. There was not a diagnosis, there was not a cure, there was not a pill, there was not a medicine that was working in that paradigm. I didn't fit in that paradigm. And so at some point, after a couple of years, my thinking changed. And instead of looking for a cure, I started to think differently. I really let go. And I just was like, okay, maybe I'm never going to be strong and healthy again like I used to be. But I just feel like there must be some simple things that I could do to not be in so much pain every day. And that was physical pain, emotional pain, psychological pain. And so I began to research health and healing. And so this was like 1990 on the East Coast of the US. And so I kind of found the health and healing aisle in the bookstore, which was, it's just way out of the paradigm that I had grown up in. I grew up in a conventional allopathic medical household. My stepfather was a doctor. My mom was in public health. And so I just hadn't had any exposure to alternative healing and modalities. But I was really receptive at that point because I beat my head against the wall for a few years. So it was like really a 180-degree turn. So I was like, okay. And I started to read books, and the books basically had a lot of suggestions like try yoga, try meditation, try energy healing, try this, try Tai Chi, Qigong, try acupuncture, Chinese medicine, try this vegetarian diet, try this vitamin protocol. And so I did, I began to try stuff. And it worked. It wasn't like instantly better, but I definitely started to feel a little bit better each day, like right away. Um, and there were these powerful experiences of reconnection for me. So I walked into a yoga class. This was in Jamaica Plain in the Boston area. And it was the old firehouse, had been turned into a community center. And I walked in, and before the class even started, something in me went, oh, this is what I want to do with my life. And there was no cause for it. The class hadn't even begun, but it was a distinct feeling. It was not a feeling I'd had before. And it was honest. I believed it, I didn't know what it meant, but I really felt it, and recognized it and didn't disregard it. And then not that long after that, I went to the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center on the other side of the river in the Boston area. And I walked in the door and I immediately felt at home. And I'd never been there before. And again, there was like no call for it, but there was, I hadn't even talked to anybody. The meditation hadn't begun, but there was a distinct feeling. And so, things started that very quickly. I was motivated to do a little bit of practice every day, and so I set up a daily schedule. I started Tai Chi and Qigong also. So I would do that in the morning because like getting out of bed and getting down on the ground to do yoga was like not a good idea, right? But Tai Chi and Qigong you do standing, and it was like energy cultivation and reorganization, and it felt good. And then after work, I'd do yoga. And then in the evening, I'd do meditation. And just every day, it just became a rhythm for me, applying mindfulness and daily activities. And there was a lot of motivation because it felt good. I also started acupuncture and Chinese herbs. And then not that long after that, a few months later, I was visiting a yoga center because something in me said, so part of this was like deep listening, like learning to listen to myself in a way that I hadn't done before. And something in me said, I want to live in an ashram. And I was like, okay, we can live in an ashram. I didn't know what an ashram was, So I went to visit a yoga center, an ashram. And while I was there, I had a little bit of a relapse. And somebody I was working with, I was doing like a work exchange. And so somebody on my work team said they thought they could help me. And so they found a room where we could work, and they said, stand here. And then they started making these gestures over my body without touching me. They were just like doing this over my body. And I felt all this stuff changing in me. And I'd never experienced anything like that. And I kind of blurted out, like, what are you doing? But something in me said, I want to learn how to do that. So that's basically what I've done for the last 35 years is these daily practices, yoga, meditation, and energy healing, which eventually became craniosacral, honed in on that. And that's my professional life as well here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Just helping people, and it's a delight to share this with people and to be able to help people.
Yeah, thank you for the story. That's awesome. How you're defining yourself, well, not defining yourself, how you're speaking of yourself in terms of your journey to well-being and getting in touch with these tools that help facilitate well-being, these practices, philosophies. behind those practices, there are philosophies there aligned with well-being and a perspective on living a healthy, well life. So, what does living well mean to you? And then we can unpack it for the rest of this conversation.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a big question, and it
Mm-hmm.
changes. It changes. Um, but certainly, I've been lucky to cultivate more physical health, than I had at the time. So on the one hand, physical health is delightful to have, and on the other hand, I do know that is not the way to define well-being. It's wonderful when we have physical health, and I feel tremendous gratitude for that. But I can't define well-being by having physical health. I like to have it,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't define well-being that way, right? Um, Mental health, more important for sure. In terms of our relationship to things, that feels like fundamental to well-being. Being able to kind of be skillful in our relationship to things, so whatever, if we have a mental health diagnosis, that is still workable. That's not a bad thing, so to speak. We might like to not have it, but it's not bad. It's like the same as physical health, in that we might prefer to have physical health, but it's okay that we don't, right? So that's like well-being, right? Is that we can accept whatever is imperfect, whatever is not the way we would like it to be. So mental health isn't a lack of a diagnosis so much as it's the capacity to accept whatever our mental state is, and to be able to work with it skillfully, wisely, so that it's not so burdensome, right? Because moods come and go, emotions come and go, and we can still be here and have a wise relationship to that. So I think, like well-being, I think also like a more kind of on the outer level, having community is optimal well-being. That's something that's part of why I moved to Berkeley, because I feel like I know more people here, and there are more things I like to do over here. And in my elderhood, that's becoming more and more important to align myself with community and feel like I have community around me, community of like-minded individuals, community of people who support me, who I can support, where there's mutual support. Um, yeah, it's hard to like sum up well-being in one sentence. But I think this kind of suppleness of mind, where we can things can be workable. It doesn't mean we never get upset, but we can recognize our upset and then work our way skillfully towards some more equanimity, some more stability. Um, and then, of course, it's great to have financial resources, right? But then again, it's tough if we're defining ourselves by our wealth, by our material wealth, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of a tricky one. All the things that perhaps we would normally consider to be well-being, like physical health, mental health, material well-being, material health, uh, those on the surface, like, oh yeah, that's well-being. But in fact, if we look a little more closely, that would be a very narrow definition of well-being. It would be delightful to have all those things, but if we need that to feel well-being, then we're in a little bit of a difficult situation. So it seems like, this capacity to really reflect on our situation and find our way, have the skillful means with the mind, the understanding of the mind, to find our way to some kind of equanimity and, kind of inner calm and peacefulness, and I mean, which doesn't mean we're like never excited, right? It
Mm-hmm.
means that below all that, there's kind of a stability, and a kind of, if we look at like equanimity, doesn't mean like flat, right? It's like, so if this is like the midline, there's here and there's here. Equanimity means like we're like, yeah, like a little above, right? We can be equanimous of the lower, but generally speaking, we're like a little above at least, like we're not, so we go up and down, right? But the equanimity, sometimes we think of equanimity as like a very flat tone, but there's that, yeah, the kind of delightfulness, like a calm delight and appreciation. Um, so I think those are my thoughts right now. They could change.
Exactly. I love that you said that, because that gets lost. I'm glad you said that from the very beginning. It is a big question, and that's why we're having the conversation. That's why I'm doing this podcast, because it is a big question that I think is important to have. And the next thing you said was that it's changing. It changes, and that's important to understand that your perspective. I'm not yours in particular, but in general, all of our perspectives on living well and what the good life means, it shifts and changes according to the circumstances of our lives and according to the things that we've learned through our life experiences. It changes. We learn something new about ourselves, and so therefore our idea of the what living well means is going to shift, even if we're not aware of that consciously. Or we come into contact with information, we have a healing experience, or we have an experience of illness. It's going to all inform our perspective on what living well means. You also talked about how it's nice to have physical well-being, and I think I want to make sure I think correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would suspect that when you said it's nice to have physical well-being, um, but also acknowledging that we're going to have challenges. There are going to be things that come up in our physical health that we're not aware of. We might have a predisposition to something, or things just happen. Shit happens, and we find ourselves in a physically challenged situation, and that doesn't. And so in that physically challenged situation, I may not be able to get up and, I don't know, say I can't walk for 4 or 5 miles anymore for some reason. And so that I can look at that and say that my physical health is compromised. The physical health, to me, the way I look at it, is not necessarily compromised. It's just that health is found within the boundaries of the conditions or the state of your being. If I have physical limitations where I can't walk 4 miles anymore for some reason, that doesn't mean I don't have physical health necessarily. It's just not the physical health I used to have. And that well-being that's nice if I can go walk more than 4 or 5 miles and I can walk 10 miles, but I can't anymore. And and I think that next thing you mentioned about mental health is an important piece of the puzzle, in terms of being able to sit with that and acknowledge that I can't do what I used to be able to do. And that's okay. And being able to say that's okay is a hard thing for a lot of us to do, especially as we get older.
Mm.
Uh, I have limitations now. Oh, I don't know how to deal with this. But I think we can still be physically healthy and well within the confines of our constraints placed on us by life itself. But it may not be some idealistic form of well-being, of physical well-being, but it is what I have, and it requires what you said, that equanimity of mind. It requires a skillful means of relating to our experience in order for us to be okay with that. Even that goes for mental stuff too. We're going to have anxiety. We're going to have moments of depression. Again, shit happens. I can meditate every day all you want. Certain things going to come and pop up that may trigger something deep in our subconscious that we're not aware of, and it may inspire anxiety? It might inspire a panic attack. It may be a small, minimal panic, a minor panic attack, but it might inspire a moment of depression. But we don't have to get lost and sucked into it. And cultivating and developing skillful means of relating to our experiences is sounds like to me, and I think I agree with you, that is so central to living a good life, no matter what is happening to us physically, mentally. How do we live well within the boundaries of the confines of our experience? Does that make any sense to me? I'm just adding off of what you're saying, and maybe I'm in.
Yeah. No, I
Uh,
appreciate hearing you. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I think I think one of the things I'm, just being upfront here in these conversations is, how do we have a conversation like this and find out, how do we try to clarify how we think about something based on what you're saying, and how do I try to unpack what you're saying? How do I try to um, gain a little more clarity with what you're saying? And audience, I hope you're doing the same thing. I hope you're listening to us and trying to figure out, like, how does that make sense to me, or where do I agree or disagree with that? Great, that's the point. And us having this type of reflection and back and forth. One guest said a creative conversation around this theme. Yeah. So I wanted to, can you say a little bit more about, so you talked about the physical well-being and you talk about mental. How does spirituality play in this? And what does that term mean to you? Or, I mean, maybe you don't, yeah, I'll just let you go with it.
Yeah,
How does
thanks.
spirituality play in this?
Well, spirituality is very important to me. Um, and that was really actually, that was part of the illness. That was, the illness was also, it was also like it was a spiritual awakening. Not like a spiritual awakening, it was a spiritual awakening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think people define spirituality differently, but I guess to me, it's like it's another dimension, beyond just this physical reality, going through day to day life, showing up for appointments and seeing people, seeing friends, and sleeping and eating. And there's another dimension. There's some other component, which is like unquantifiable, you know. Um, but it's some sense of connection to something greater than ourselves. And maybe it's a sense of purpose, a certain drive. Maybe it's a certain kind of quality of intimacy. But there's some element that's beyond the mundane, beyond, it's like 1 + 1 = 3. It's like there's some other piece, right? In there that is hard to define and hard to
Mm.
quantify. Yeah, I could say more, but I'm wondering if you have things you want
No,
to.
go for it. Say more.
Okay.
Um,
So I actually, kind of an interesting thing, I actually went to church with the neighbors from like kindergarten. And that's because, well, it just happened. But I was born into a family that was not particularly religious and was maybe even like anti religion, atheistic, agnostic. And I didn't really know anything about that. Like, but I would say that as an adult reflecting back, like, oh yeah, okay. So maybe it was kindergarten, maybe it was first grade. I had a friend, I lived in Baltimore, Maryland, and I had a friend across the alleyway, and she went to church. And so one Sunday morning, I went with her family, her brother and her mother and father all together. Um, and I loved it, it sparked something in me. It was an Episcopal church, like a block away, and we'd walk up there. And somehow I was motivated enough to get myself up every Sunday morning get myself dressed, get myself breakfast, and then walk across the alleyway to my friend's house and then go to church with her family. And I would get there like early because I remember like hanging out with them over breakfast and whatever, and then walking up to church with them. And I don't remember ever struggling with this. I don't remember it. And my family was not up. My mother was not getting me breakfast and was not helping me choose how to dress, like I don't know when it started, but it was early. And I don't remember like seeing anyone, I mean, I was kind of a latchkey kid anyway. So, but anyway, somehow I was motivated enough. And, and when I reflect back, like why, I mean, it was kind of everything, right? It was church. It was the ritual and ceremony, it was the beautiful space. And then the singing and, maybe the preaching. I don't remember that so much, but, and then we had Sunday school. And then at some point I became an acolyte, and then you like carry the candles in, and you wear your vestment. And then at some point it was time to be confirmed, but I hadn't been baptized. And so I mentioned it to my mother. And then my mother kind of was born into the Episcopal Church, which was like, some people say it's like the church that you get baptized, confirmed, married, and divorced in, or something like that. So anyway, she had been like baptized in the Episcopal Church. Not that she ever went, but so when I mentioned to her, she was not opposed to the idea. And in fact, I'm the middle of three girls. My older and younger sister, she decided that they should get baptized too, because I wanted to get confirmed. So I had to get baptized. So then we all got baptized. And I remember we were 4 years apart, right? So maybe I'm 12 and my older sister's 16 and my younger sister's 8, maybe something like that. Maybe I'm 11 and, but I remember my older sister saying to me in a kind of intimidating way, like, because of you, we had to get baptized. And I really didn't know what to say to her, but later on I started thinking like, yeah, because of me, you have a place reserved in heaven, just like as a quippy comeback,
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
And what's really interesting is as an adult, my older sister really enjoys church. She was in the Unitarian church for a while, and now I think she's in a Baptist church. She lives in Washington, D.C. So my younger sister, not so much. But anyway, I went to church, until my family moved to Norway. And so I was like 13. And anyway, in high school, I became kind of existentialist, which most high school students do. And in college, that's just like the age. Teenagers are existentialists. And I went to college and, so I wasn't religious during that time and I became more existentialist. And then I finished college and I had this health crisis, which was also a spiritual awakening. Because I was reflecting during that time, like, I was supposed to like get a job, right? I was being like thrown out into the world and I wasn't really prepared for any kind of work. I'd studied in environmental design. And it was like, my mind was like, either the whole world's crazy or I'm crazy, the kind of classic spiritual awakening thinking. And I definitely chose the world. But then, the illness was in Buddhism, we talk about spiritual messengers, heavenly messengers. And that's like the story of the Buddha, how he came to become a spiritual mendicant was that what are called heavenly messengers, devas, spirit beings, appeared to him, took on the guise of human form to motivate him, right? And so one appeared as an old person, and he had that recognition of, oh, aging, we're all going to age, right? And one appeared to him as a sick person, and he was like, oh my God, sickness, we can all get sick. Because like for his mind, he saw one person, he realized, oh, that could happen to me, it could happen to my wife, it could happen to my baby, it could happen to anyone, because that's how his mind was like ready and open and saw those connections. And then a corpse, he saw a corpse and the same thing. Oh my God, any one of us can die. I can die. Everyone is going to die, And then a spiritual mendicant, which was common in India, but he didn't get out beyond the palace walls very often. And so this is the story of his like spiritual journey, right? And so the spiritual mendicant and him seeing the serenity, the calm and the peace, and that was very impactful for him. And so he packed up and left that night. Is the story that we are told, right, of the Buddha's motivation for spiritual journey. So I really view, for me, that illness as like a spiritual illness, in that it was like somehow like Cator's not living the life she could live. And then it was through the illness that I found my inspiration. I found Buddhism, I found yoga, I found craniosacral energy healing. And so I really view that illness as being transformative and reconnecting me to my spirituality, right? Because there were the years where I was like lost in the wilderness. Teenagers are lost in the wilderness spiritually, often, not always, but teenagers do become existentialists, developmentally speaking. So that's kind of my piece of my spiritual journey, was like growing up in the Christian fold and then losing that connection, and then the illness bringing me back, and then finding it as really central finding a way that it could be really central, that felt right for me, that it could be really central in my mature life.
Mm, love it. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think I love the story behind it, the story of your journey behind your view. Uh, and I think it's important because it encourages us to reflect on our own journey,
Mm.
into our whatever view we have on something. And I love how you look at, I love the 1+1 = 3, that there's something beyond our understanding. It's something beyond words and language that we can how we, again, I'm going to use the word define, how we quasi define spirituality. Spirituality is something that transcends our language. It transcends, we can't put it in a box. And it means something different to everyone, of course. But even each person that it tries to explain it in their own language, it still feels to me like that 1+1, that 1+1 = 3
Mm.
that you said, that it is something else. I don't have, and all the language that we use is like the finger pointing to it. Like, it's this thing, this spirituality thing. And I'm glad you gave that background, because it's something beyond mind and body, yet it can encompass mind and body. Because I grew up Southern Baptist in the church, and like you said, it's the just being in the building. It's a vibe. It's the feeling, the music. I mean, the singing, the preaching. I mean, I grew up Southern Baptist, so the preaching, boy, if you don't feel that, something wrong with you. Just that feeling, yes, the words, absolutely. But being in an environment where the idea is to transcend your ordinary reality in a way, your ordinary viewpoint of how things work in the world. There's a greater power. There's something greater than yourself, that spirituality points to, and how important that is to living well, to living a good life, is to have some kind of connection with that which is greater than ourselves. And institutions like the church can create an environment where we can have that. Now, of course, some institutions are dogmatic. I personally think a lot of them need to be updated, but that's my personal take. But those institutions create an environment where we can at least tap into that transcendent aspect of ourselves beyond our mind and body that's hard to describe. Um, and you found that in the church, and I think that's amazing. I think even at a young age we have this natural inclination. We're drawn to it, spirituality in some way. Like you say, when you're young, you didn't quite know, but there's a feeling that's pulling you in that direction, and you happen to find it with your neighbor. being able to connect with them and their family and be in that environment where there's some acknowledgement of something greater than ourselves that has a power to impact our lives. And another thing, and so I like to say that because there's a lot of criticism to in certain circles around religious institutions and their value and etc. And I'm like, no, there's value in it. I personally think there's lots of things that can be updated, but there's a lot of value there because I've had that experience like you as a young kid. That I think that's when my spiritual journey really began in the church. I feel it was a feeling similar to what you felt, that just kept drawing me in. It's hard to describe. And then the thing, I think that kind of paved the way, that connection that you've already had with yourself. And then when the life, this is something that people don't want to acknowledge sometimes, but hard times can bring about, can help you transcend yourself a little bit. And help you find a way to like, okay, what's going on here? I'm in pain. I'm suffering.
Yeah.
Uh, Pain and suffering can inspire us to seek or to look somewhere else outside of the pain and suffering. And that's what spirituality can provide for us. That there's something else to us. There's something else to the world that is beyond my mind. You know, like you say, am I crazy or is the world crazy? You're like, the world is crazy. And to be able to say, okay, what is it then? Where are the solutions? And like you said earlier, you start searching, start seeking, experimenting, trying to understand. Like there has to be something else, and inspired that like something calling upon you to wake up, wake up. And for a lot of us, that the pain and suffering that we experience, the challenges that we have, are like a wake up call,
Hmm.
and inspiring us to look a little closer, look a little deeper. Um, and I'm happy that like you had some prior experience with something that may have inspired you in some subtle way, to seek out these other things, or to be a little bit more open minded to energy medicine. I think I became more open minded to energy medicine because I really do believe this. That it was because of my experiences in church,
Hmm.
those religious
Hmm.
experiences where you're like, wow, there's this feeling.
Hmm.
There's something else going on here. And I'm like, well, energy stuff, of course. It might be a different language. Some of it is foo-foo, but yeah, that's okay. I mean, there's weird stuff in every arena, in every discipline. Um, but you know that there's something there. And I think those of us who been involved in religious institutions where we've had some kind of spiritual experience, we can recognize that there's something true about quote unquote energy medicine. So yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit more about that. Do you have anything you want to comment on about what I just said?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate hearing what you're saying, and that kind of causes me to consider it in a different way, because I hadn't thought about that before. That the religious or spiritual experience could be a factor in the energy healing. Because if only recently, like in the last like year or two, or maybe a little longer than that, but in my maturity, begun to kind of be able to language that through line for me, of early religious experience and then mature spiritual seeking,
Mm,
because there was a definite disconnect between them. And the language can be quite different. Of course, there's similarities, but the language is quite different. Like Buddhism is really clear, it's all your mind. And Christianity is like about other, about other. And so we can bridge that gap potentially, through conversation and dialogue, because Buddhism understands what we perceive as other is actually your mind.
mm,
Because the human mind creates reality, and the human mind is just vast and so sophisticated. And so, from that Buddhist viewpoint, like what we often call God is just different experiences of the human mind, you know. Um, so there are gods as entities in Buddhism and Hinduism and yoga, right? But they are not more powerful than your mind, actually. You know, your mind is what has the capacity for the transcendent. So, what I love about that is this ownership, because when we go to God, there can be a letting go, which is skillful means, but there can also be a surrender, which is actually losing our power. Because when we understand that it's all our mind, that actually gives us this power to really develop the mind, you know, and understand what changes our perception, you know. So there's different states of concentration, and there's um, different qualities of awareness and love and compassion and wisdom, and all of that is within the human mind, and we can learn how to recognize that and how to cultivate that, and that's very empowering, as opposed to a more Christian orientation towards God and the divine, and seeing it as something outside of ourselves, which maybe is more like hearsay, like more like unpredictable, like, you know. So like there's this pathway in Buddhism, and we can really, if we choose, we can really understand, like, oh, actually, I play a role in how often I'm in a positive state of mind, right? As opposed to just like, it's all beyond me, I surrender to God, you know. Not to in any way like minimize or demean that, but just that there's an empowerment and understanding how the mind works and the role we play in our state of mind and our overall kind of holistic health and well-being, as we talked about earlier, beyond the physical state of the body or the psychological state of the mind. To
Mm-hmm.
understand how the mind works, we have the potential to be able to work with all of those complexities
Mm-hmm.
skillfully. I hope
Yeah.
that's making sense.
Oh yeah, we're playing. Yeah, we're just playing around here, you know. Yeah, and I think that there's this conversation that happens between Buddhism and Christianity, and again, we're playing with language, you know, and I think recognizing the power of the mind to create, to imagine, the mind creates the narrative by which we live by, and I think that the various traditions have different ways of exploring that narrative. And the thing I do like about Buddhism and the yogic traditions is this, that you can train your mind, you can polish and refine your capacity to discriminate, to have discernment, to be able to be an observer of the mind. That there's something that transcends that. You know, even the mind itself. Again, that's how you define mind. There's different places going to define mind slightly different. About these different aspects of the mind, and you know, to be in that place of the witness, that place where you can observe, and there's something that kind of extends beyond what we normally perceive, not just in the external world, but even in our imaginative mind. And being able to tap into that, but we can shape the mind. And in the yoga tradition, like shape the mind, cultivate the mind, so, or they use the term purify the mind, so that the light of the buddhi or the greater mind can shine through, and or that which transcends that, all of it can shine through. And again, different people are going to language that slightly different. And for me, I like the exploration and the play of having that kind of conversation, and look at it through that lens. Okay, let me look at it through this lens. How does that inform my behaviors at the end of the day? How does that inform my actions? How does that inform my well-being? If I look at it through that lens, or if I look at it through that another lens, one lens is going to be going to resonate with me more than another. Um, and I think that's the thing I like about the Dalai Lama, and his a lot of his views are quote unquote progressive. Now, I'm not talking about right left progressivism. I'm talking about in the sense that, oh, we learn something new, let's take it. If I can learn something from the Christian perspective, great. If I can learn something from this other perspective, great. If I can learn from science, great. Let me modify my viewpoint. Let me modify. This might be my tradition. This may, in his case, my particular tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and I can still do that and let that be the core of my practice. But I can still look at all these other things and learn from them and gain some insights and see how it can help me live a better life as a result of that. So yeah, I love this kind of conversation. I love that kind of exploration. I think it's, like before we got on, we start recording, we talked about, you mentioned that we need to be having these kinds of conversations. I'm like, yes, absolutely. Here in the United States prior to the election, God knows we need more conversations with each other, not arguments, not debates. We're not debating here. We're just having a fun exploration of ideas about these things. Yeah.
With
So
the
you,
pending election, we really need our steadiness.
yeah, you talking about
We
equanimity.
need our equanimity and our love and
Whoa,
compassion.
exactly. We loving kindness
Steady,
practice.
stay steady. Don't fall into the trap of reactivity.
Right, exactly. Especially come November 5th, or we're at midnight when we finally have an idea of what's going on. Oh goodness, what's going to happen. So I haven't forgotten this thing you mentioned earlier. I just want to kind of explore the mind, the body, mind, soul, spirituality aspect of this. But you mentioned something else. You mentioned two other things that that I'm so happy you brought up as well, is community.
Mm,
Um, we need each other. No, we're we're in the Buddhist tradition, so this idea of dependent on origination, we're all intertwined. We're all so mixed in. I don't know. I don't care what analogy one use. We're a web. We're a part of each one of us are nodes in this web or in a net. Um, but everything that we do has an impact on the lives of another.
mm.
Um, Having someone else in our lives that we can connect with is important. I'll just let you. I'm not going to say much more. Can you say a little bit more about? I know you did. You said a bit, but I would love to hear more about community to you and you know the we.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know, it's become more and more important as I've matured. Um, so I think that I can also say that I think that was part of what drew me to church.
Mhm.
Like it was also like the cookies and tea after church,
Right?
seriously,
Oh, I know.
and the swing set in out back, and the playground and the Sunday school and all of that. And I guess we had a progressive church maybe because we learned because in confirmation class we learned about all different religious paths and we went to visit different denominations.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was interesting and fun to me. And then after I finished college, so then I had this illness and spiritual awakening, and then I went and I spent 3 years living in different spiritual communities. It happened very spontaneously for me. I did my first retreat at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and I came home and like immediately gave notice on my apartment in uh, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and was like, "I'm out of here." And I had the idea that I was going to California. I'd had a trip to the West Coast. I'd had a trip to the West Coast just prior to that retreat. So maybe that was January, and then February I saw the retreat, and then I came home, and I don't know, maybe it was like March 1st. I was giving up my apartment. Um, and I had a ticket to California, but it wasn't until like maybe April 1st. So I had this month, and I was like, well, what am I going to do? Because I had a few friends out in California and Washington and Oregon, which I had visited. And, so it was my first 10-day retreat, a meditation retreat, which happened to be with a monastic community with some Buddhist nuns. And, like, boom, I'm out of here. So I had this month, the month of March, and I was like, well, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? And I thought, oh, maybe I could go do work exchange at one of those spiritual communities, right? And I was like, no, not the yoga center. Maybe I could do it at the Buddhist center, And so then I called them up, and somehow that worked out. I think they said, oh, we need someone to help plant. I was a gardener at that time. And they said, we need someone to help plant these plants. And it was March. And I'll tell you, like, conspiratorially, like, I knew it was too early. Like, they wouldn't be able to plant those plants, because the frost line, because I knew, like, that it was just like at a little bit of elevation. I knew that it would be too early frost wise. But I said, sure, I can do that. I'm a gardener. So, because I figured once I got there, they'd do something with me, right? So it was like a week or 10 days or something I was going for. Maybe it was longer. I don't know. But anyway, I went to do work exchange, which was like a work retreatant, which meant that you worked like 4 or 5 hours a day, and the rest of that you were actually in a retreat space. So you were in silence. So you had some interaction, but you were separate from the staff. You were in silence. And I loved it. I loved that balance of interacting with people and then having all the rest of the time to meditate. And then they were like, they actually asked me if I wanted to go on staff. I think they needed staff people. I don't think it was special about me. I think they needed staff people. And I said, sure, can I spend longer on work retreat? So I ended up staying like a month in that status. And then I went on staff, and it's like a year commitment, So it all just was like, it just was very spontaneous, right? So I spent a year there, but then I was like a Dharma bum. I was like in it. So I went from there to Plum Village in France with Thich Nhat Hanh. So this was like in the mid-90s. And then we spent the summer there, and then I was in and out of Kripalu Center doing like intensive training and a bunch of other some Buddhist centers, and spent a month with Ruth Dennison. And then I was doing mindfulness-based stress reduction training with John Kabat-Zinn in Worcester Medical Center, and then going in and out of retreat at the meditation IMS. And then I went to Lama Foundation the next summer, which is in New Mexico, northern New Mexico, where Ram Dass wrote Be Here Now. And then I went into 2 months of silent retreat at a Buddhist monastery in Southern California, Wat Metta Forest Monastery. And then after that, so it was basically about 3 years of living like itinerant and actually having no plans. Like really, like I just felt like I was being sent from here to there, happened very spontaneously. And then I came out of that retreat, and I was like, well, I guess I'll drive up to San Francisco because I had a few friends there. And I had a boyfriend there. And I turned off the ignition to my car outside of his house. And as I turned off the ignition of the car, I had this spontaneous feeling of like, why do I feel like I'm not going anywhere anytime soon? And that was 35 years ago.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so it was very intuitive that it was time to change the way I was living. And like, it kind of came to me over a period of months, like, oh, now it's time to give back. That happened to be my Saturn return. I don't know if you know about Saturn return,
Oh,
but
yeah.
oh yeah. So it was like, oh yeah, like everyone moves to San Francisco in their Saturn return. So, so it was like quintessential moment, right? Even though I didn't know it yet, and so I just realized like it was time to change. And instead of being itinerant and being a Dharma bum, it was time to like develop a worldly livelihood and to share all of the things I had been cultivating over those years in spiritual community. But the time living in spiritual community was deeply impactful for me, and in some way it guided me and continues to guide me, because of like just all the principles that I learned, of how to live with others. There was a lot of repatterning from early childhood. I was lucky that the communities I lived in, some of them we had conscious communication skills. In my energy healing training, we actually trained in conscious relationship skills because there was the view, the teachers saw energy healing as being in relationship, and so to be conscious in that relationship. So those skills, and how to just live with others and just accept everyone, like to not judge, like everyone is equal in the community. Those were very profound experiences for me and really guided me in my adult life, like laid a foundation for my adult life. And so I'm still, trying to figure out community out here in like the open world, not in the contained world of a spiritual community. I have many spiritual communities I'm involved with. But in terms of like what community means for me in the kind of regular world is challenging. I mean, I'm part of a lot of different communities: the cranial community, the yoga community, the yoga teachers community, the mindfulness community, the Buddhist community. But what that looks like in my day-to-day life is still like an ongoing question. And then with maturity, because I don't have a partner. I mean, I have had partners at times, but I'm mostly living my life as a single woman, and I'm a mature single woman. How will I get my needs met in my maturity? Like, what is a safe place for me in terms of growing feeble, growing old, needing help with care, and to offer that to others, to be in a co-housing or co-community. And I'm not sure, it's become a really active question for me, one that is a lot of why I moved to Berkeley. I'm actually living in a women's co-op house here in Berkeley, which is just women, just people. It's not like a Buddhist co-op house or anything like that. So um, yeah, it's something I'm really actively investigating. What will it look like? What can it look like? What is possible to create in this world? And then living here in California, where property values are like, right. you know?
Whew.
Yeah. Yeah, what can we do? What can we create? I'm not a multimillionaire, so it's an open question. But I'm enjoying engaging people in it and talking about it, and finding my way, and hearing from others. Um, yeah, I'm curious, like, how is it for you, and what do you experience? What do you envision?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I love the context that you bring to these questions. I love it because it's so important. And yeah, I mean, me personally, I'm relatively introverted, but I love being with people. At the same time, I'm like, how you introverted and you love being with people? I like my time to myself, and I like connecting with others. I like the interdependency of being in community. Um, I just think it's just natural. I think it's a part of who we are as a species. Um, we've evolved based on we evolved as a result of community. We needed each other, and it's really important to me to have community. I did something similar to you, where I hopped around at different retreat centers. I spent time at Creek Palu, at uh, the Ithaca Zen Center, and Mount Madonna Center here in California, where I spent a little over a year. Really taught me that you can live in community and be with people with. Now a lot of people had different ideas, different minds, of course. Um, but I learned about the potential for being in a community of practice, being in a community where there is a similar interest, at least by most people, interested in interested in the good. I know it's a very broad statement there, but interested in the good in some capacity. The conversations that you have, the challenges that you have working with people. I often say I miss church. The parts of church that I miss most is the community part. Now there's lots of other stuff. The ritual, I like ritual and all of that too. But the people doing activities together. I still remember revival. Just those we used to have back then. Revival for go like 4 or 5 days.
Mm.
Um, I loved it. The big meals and everybody got responsibilities. Or even at the Mount Madonna Center, when we would have retreats, they have like 4 annual retreats, and they're centered around a particular theme, and how the community comes together to make it possible, to make it happen. And then we have this big experience together, and you're connecting with each other. I just think, me personally, I love it. I love that. And as I get older, I long for that even more. I long to be in a spiritual community.
Mm.
I long to be in a community of people who are engaged in practice and in personal development, because that's just what I'm into. Some people might be into something else, but that's what I'm into, and I see the value in it, and I see the necessity of it, um, for my life personally. But I think it's in order to live a good life, to live well, I think having friends, having a community can be very important, a very important piece of the puzzle. Even like these sadhus, they might be isolated, but they got, say in India, wandering monk, but they have the community of wandering monks.
Yeah.
They might spend long periods of time alone, but a lot of them, they do have their community. They have their connection with other wandering
Yeah.
monks that they can connect with. I just think it's a necessary piece of the puzzle to spiritual development, or development in general, developing ourselves holistically as a person in the world. I just think community is a necessary piece of the puzzle, and absolutely necessary for. I should qualify my statement here. I should say absolutely necessary for everybody, not necessary. I guess there are a few humans out there who can just completely be isolated and be okay. Um, but for overwhelming majority of us humans, I think that community is absolutely necessary. Having relationships, having people we can talk to, having a shoulder we can lay our head on, or having a mentor or teacher where we can sit at their feet and, metaphorically, folks, sit at their feet and take in any knowledge or wisdom from the elders. I just think that those things are an important part of being a human being. Yeah, that's my take right now. At least what I had to say about it today. I'm sure you asked me 5 hours from now, I'll probably say something totally different. Not totally different, but with a little bit more clarification. But yeah, we're coming to a close here. And you did say, I mentioned another thing too, that I want to at least bring that up, because that's a challenge that I've been dealing with. I mean, I have this very monkish part of me. Uh, and I think that it's some aspect of it, maybe because I didn't grow up with a whole lot of financial resources. But I think there was a part of me that was, for lack of a better set of terms, almost like taking a vow of poverty in some respects. And you mentioned the importance of financial stability. I mean, just from a practical perspective, if you're going to live out here in the world, we live in California, in the Bay Area. So, I mean, good Lord. Um, it's expensive. You need financial resources. Having financial freedom, having financial stability is so important. And I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes that can get neglected or pushed to the side in various spiritual communities. But in actuality, it's important. It's important to have a means to sustain yourself. Even if you live in a community, it's important for that community to have the financial means to sustain itself. And do you have anything else you would like to say about that or add to that?
Yeah. No, thanks for mentioning it. And I think the vow of poverty, I think one of the things is like that poverty doesn't have to be a dirty word.
No.
You know, to that we're equal citizens. no matter what the material wealth we carry is.
Mm-hmm.
And to really, I think it's good to talk about it. Like, it's okay to be poor,
Yeah.
it's really about our relationship to the situation, and to remove the stigma that may be there, and especially the Bay Area with all the pop-ups and startups and Elon Musk's, and just the massive wealth that is held by a few people, and how that drives the culture in certain aspects of the Bay Area. People snapping up buildings at bargain basement prices, because they have the gazillion dollars to do that, right? Um, but that doesn't have to define us. Yeah, that
Mm-mm.
we still have our personal wealth, our inner wealth, and we can choose. We can choose to take a vow of poverty, to recognize that, yeah, actually having having a high level of material affluence isn't that important to me. Having enough is certainly very helpful.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and then I have these livelihoods. Like it's kind of interesting that the energy healing cranial work kind of came to me, because that's like a totally legitimate livelihood. you
Mm-hmm.
know and so um, I didn't plan it. I didn't really plan it, it just kind of happened, right? And so, like, if I want to think about past lives, I could say, like, oh, it's an ability I cultivated in a past life so that I could have livelihood, right? I don't know if that's true,
It's a
but
great story.
but it's something that I was just very intuitively drawn to and had these experiences with, and then yoga. Yoga asana, but I'm a yoga therapist. So it's this therapeutic application. It's kind of like an alternative form of PT, a physical therapy. And then, of course, mindfulness is a big buzzword, sort of like mindfulness coaching. I sort of wrap all three together, um, and do a lot of, I kind of go between a lot of teaching and a lot of working privately. I seem to switch it up about every decade, or maybe less often. At one point, I founded a nonprofit that offered yoga and mindfulness to children here in the Bay Area, and that was a big deal for a period of time. Um, that was like the period of life where I felt like people were actually like throwing money at me because that work was so needed and so well met. But I ultimately didn't, I liked what we did as an organization. I didn't like what I did. I didn't like the way I spent my time. I found it very, very tiresome. And so, actually through conversation with some of my teachers at some point, it was like, oh, doing my private one-on-one work is actually cultivating samadhi. It's cultivating a calm and a concentration, and now I'm kind of, so I kind of went towards that, and that was very healing. And now I'm kind of coming back out to teach more, because I really love working with groups and I really love people. So for me, I kind of have gone through periods of doing a lot of teaching, and then doing a lot of one-on-one work, and I did that organizational, running the organization, and I seem to, I don't know if there's any wisdom to it at all, because it's completely intuitive, and it's more like, I don't like to say I'm just introverted or extroverted, because I know I have parts of both in me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I definitely like time alone, and I also really like being with people. And it's more like these ebbs and flows in my life, where like I'm in a period of like really needing to balance on my own, and then like, oh, I really want to be more social now, and it can take me like years to move between things. um, so yeah, my livelihood, those, I've done those three things, the craniosacral yoga, mindfulness, meditation, for, like, for my livelihood for over 20 years, maybe close to 30 years now. But the formula changes, what it looks like changes. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, we need the livelihood. I think, yeah. Even when a mendicant says they're taking a vow of poverty, they're still dependent on someone putting that food in the begging bowl, right? So yeah, poverty doesn't have to be a dirty word at all, but there are some minimal requirements just to sustain ourselves as human beings. But at the end of the day, it's like you said in the beginning, how we view our situation, how we relate to our situation, is going to be the determining factor on how well our life is, ultimately, because we may find ourselves in circumstances not under our control. How do we do the best we can with the situation we have? All righty. Well, I want to, any final thoughts, anything you would like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Um, just I think recognizing that we all have the capacity to cultivate well-being, even when it feels like our external circumstances are beyond our control and are not the circumstance for well-being. Still, we have the capacity to work with the mind and cultivate well-being. And there are like almost like I could say prescriptions for that. Like we can do that in a way that isn't random, that's going to lead in this direction.
Mm-hmm.
Because human beings have cultivated that wisdom over thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking if, you're hearing this and you're like, yeah, well-being, yeah, right. Like I wish,
Right. Yeah.
to, for that hopefulness to recognize that in fact, well-being is possible, and that we all can work with our mind skillfully going in the direction of greater well-being.
Awesome. It's a process that's ever unfolding and changing, and I love that to end on that. We can work ourselves and have the skillful means to move in the direction of well-being no matter what is arising. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation. I think we could probably talk for hours on, and I'm sure there's things that we could have spoken about that we just didn't get a chance to get to, and that just opens up the door for another conversation in the future. And I think that, I always tell guests that, this first conversation to kind of focus on a general philosophy or personal viewpoint on what living well means and see where it goes. I think in a future conversation, it would be nice to have you come and talk about craniosacral therapy, TMJ, and the intersection of all of that with Buddhism and yoga therapy. That could be an awesome, fun conversation to just kind of focus on that, just unpack your viewpoint, and let's see if that's a possibility sometime in the future. That would be great too.
Thanks. Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd enjoy that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to share with us your wisdom, your knowledge, and it's been fun. Thank you.
My pleasure. Fun to talk with you, Broderick.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.